Hi everyone, thank you for attending the Supplier Connect webinar. I am Jill Becker. I will be the moderator for today's webinar. I'm the marketing manager here at Wynne Systems. I'll be joined by Helen Sowerby, who is the Director of Business Development, as well as David Verhan, Project Manager, and they're both based out of Ellen. I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Helen to finish up with the webinar. Thank you.
Okay, so the point about today's session is really to go through and give you an idea of how the Supplier Connect functionality is designed to provide a solution to some of the problems that form around the re-rent side of things. So that's dealing with the equation of your job sites out in the field and being able to actually requisition equipment effectively, turn those into rentals as quickly as possible, so when you know you can't supply from your own equipment, be able to go out and talk to those vendors efficiently and effectively and very, very definitely quickly, and that's a key part of this. And then also making sure that that flows back through to the equipment facility and to your AP process so that you can really start to grasp what's going on from a business management perspective. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to go through on a workflow basis just to take you through each of those steps, and as we go through that we'll do a live demo for each of the different sections, but hopefully that will all start to make sense from a business perspective. And then we'll talk a little bit about the usage in terms of versions and applications, so you can see where you're actually going to be able to use this functionality. And lastly, we'll then drop into a Q&A. So at that point, we can open up the questions to the floor, and obviously you can ask whatever you feel that is necessary. From a terminology point of view, because obviously we've got people on the call from different places in terms of geography, but also different types of business, when I refer to re-rent today, whatever terminology you use, whether it is sub-hire or outside vendor services or outside service vendors, rehire, sub-rental, third-party equipment rental, external rental, cross-hire, they are all the same thing. So even though your terminology is slightly different, as far as this functionality is concerned, we'll just refer to it as re-rent today. And what I'm going to do now is just hand over to Dave, who's going to talk a little bit about the base problem that we've been trying to look at from a business perspective.
Wonderful, thank you. So last year, Key Construction in the UK approached us to help them resolve some of the difficult and different challenges a lot of the construction companies actually face. One of them being that contacting multiple vendors is a very time-consuming task. But if you don't do it, it could actually lead to the equipment facility not actually getting the best price. Something else that we see is that there's a lack of visibility and the job site, and again the equipment facilities struggle to actually have the real-time view of what items are actually out on what different job sites. But even certain situations where these facilities don't even get notified when items have been picked up by the vendors until the actual re-rent invoice is received by the AP department. And of course this could then lead to unforeseen charges and eventually will lead to disputes.
So that's just a very quick summary of what we're trying to solve, and hopefully as we go through this you'll start to make sense of what we're talking about. So as far as the Supplier Connect workflow is concerned, everything that we're doing in this situation begins with the job site portal. And I think most of the people on the call have either seen the job site portal or are already using it. If you haven't, then it's obviously something that we can also take a bit of time to go into at a later date. But from a job site portal perspective, that's where we're starting off the process with a requisition, and the system at that point is recognising that a re-rent is required. So it knows either that that type of equipment is something that you always re-rent in, so for example if you always re-rent in your cranes, or it's something that the system recognises you're going to have to re-rent in this particular instance because of availability problems. Okay, and to feed into that process we've made some changes around preferred vendors so that you can actually set up and configure defined preferred vendors for different types of equipment, and that whole process is then kicking off a stream of events across other parts of the business. So I'm just going to drop into my Supplier Connect side of things, and to start off with I'm going to look at the job site itself. So I am logged in here as Craig, and it may just have timed me out, so hopefully we'll see if that happens. But I'm logged in as Craig. Craig is a project manager. He's out on one of his job sites, and at this point in time, he needs to think about actually renting in a pump. And for the sake of simplicity's sake, I'm just going to rent in a basic pump. And you can see on here that the one change to the screen, if people are not used to seeing this, this screen particularly, but if you are used to it, the one change that's obvious is that you've got a little drop down in there now, and you can see the various different preferred vendors that have been set up. So the background configuration of the item has been changed, so I've got some extra information in there. But other than that, that is just there for my visibility point of view, so I can see who those vendors are going to be. But from a business perspective, all the rest of this is exactly the same, so I can pop in my project codes, I can put in my off-rent date, so when do I actually want something to happen. So from an end-user perspective, there's nothing terribly complicated in here. And when I hit my Add to Rental Cart button, that's going to create me a basic requisition, and again, I'm not going to change anything massively here. I'm just going to hit my Complete Requisition button. And again, for those of you familiar with this process, this screen has changed a little bit. So recognise this thing is going to be re-rented in, and therefore, as well as actually approving my requisition, and obviously it can go through your normal approval process if you wanted to, as well as doing that, it actually turns my requisition straight into a rental contract. See there's a contract number ending in 293. And at the same time, it's created 3 separate requests for purchase quotation, and each of those has gone out to one of those 3 separate vendors that we have set up as my preferred vendors against my pump type. Okay? So it turns out that Craig is not always the most organised person in the world, and in this particular instance, he has forgotten that as well he needs a second pump, and I'm only splitting this up just to give you a clear definition between 2 different things. So my centrifugal pump is actually set up slightly differently, just so that I can show you 2 different actions. So same principle, I'm still going to put my quantity in there, but this time I've only got the 1 vendor in there, so I've only got 1 preferred vendor. So from a system point of view, again, I know I need to revent these things in because I don't keep any pumps on hand, and the difference is going to come when I hit that Complete Requisition button, and you're going to see that my requisition, we don't need to worry about the requisition at this point. Effectively, it's immediately vanished. My requisition has become a rental contract, and I don't need to worry about a request for purchase because I only have 1 preferred vendor. Therefore, it's turned that straight into a purchase order, and that purchase order has now winged its way off to the vendor in the background. So there's no human touch at that point, from the point when the human being at the job site puts the requisition on until when the actual order hits the vendor's system. So there's no need for any interaction in the middle part of that. Okay? Just to bear in mind that all of this process is using the preferred vendor pricing in the background. So you've actually got re-rent price lists actually tracking what you're expecting to pay from each of those vendors. So you've got a clear process across all of that. And from Craig's perspective out at the job site, he's got view of his equipment list. And if I just drop into his outstanding requisitions and purchase orders in here, you can see there's the one that's just turned itself straight into a requisition with a purchase order attached, and this one at the top has got a blank purchase order information on it because at the moment I don't know which of those preferred vendors I'm actually going to select from. Okay? So if I just drop back into my workflow for a second, that's all happened out at the job site, so that's one part of my geography. And the next thing I need to think about is my external vendor. So my external vendor is first of all going to get a notification by email, okay? So if again I drop into my, so for some reason it never likes swapping between Outlook, but there we go. So in my purchase request, I will in a second get a notification coming through. My email's been slow all day. Oh, well, okay, we'll just imagine it's hit me, and it'll get there eventually. We'll come back to that in a moment. So as far as my preferred vendor is concerned, they will get an email. They can log on that email, and that email will take them into this screen here, which is the Supplier Connect. So again, it's a portal based out on the web. So from any device, you can access this portal. And from here, I can see all of the activity that I've got coming through. So you can see on here, I've already been dealing with this vendor already. They've had various conversations with me about other purchasing processes, some of which have turned out to be no sale, so either they or I have decided not to proceed any further with them. And there are some that are currently under consideration, and I've got my new urgent PO that's just dropped into there, so this is my purchase request, waiting for some kind of activity against it. Okay, so I can go into this document, and actually I can edit that request for a purchase quote. So one of the things that I can do in here is I can see the rates that I've already quoted. So that is the standard rate that this vendor offers me for this particular product. And I can go into that and I can change it if I wanted to. So I don't have to stick with that. It may be that I know the marketplace is quite tough at the moment and it might be in my interest to actually offer you a slightly bigger discount. I can also confirm when I'm actually going to be able to deliver it. So I've just got this set up showing my dates, but it can obviously show you your times as well. So if you want to get down specific to the hour and the minute, then that's fine. So I can do all of that, and I can pop some notes in there as well. So I can put some detail in if I want to tell the equipment facility about something at the same time. But one of the other things that we hear about continuously is that the relationship between the rental company and the construction business can be a little fraught when it comes to the AP department. So there is something that gets charged for that is not expected on the purchase order. So you get a purchase order for the pump and everybody forgets about the delivery charges. So what we've done is say it's possible for the guys from the Supplier Connect perspective to actually take control of that and put in those additional charges up front. So effectively, from a construction point of view, what you're able to do is say, we are deferring this responsibility to you. You've got the option to go and put in the additional charges that you want to include. If you don't do that on your purchase order, Mr. Supplier, it's going to be your problem. We won't be paying for that because we've given you the opportunity to actually confirm all the details for me. So if I want to put delivery charge in there, additional accessories, all of those things, you're handing that responsibility to the vendor, and therefore there's no excuse for an additional charge hitting you without explanation later on. So the idea is to try and make things a little easier. Okay, so I've got two buttons down here. I've got a submit button. I've also got an enable to supply one. Obviously, if I hadn't wanted to submit this in the first place, I'd probably have just gone straight to my enable to supply. And in my case, I do want to actually submit a proposal. So I'm going to hit the submit button on there, and you can see that my status has changed to updated. I'm going to leave a little message there, and that's also going to feed some notifications back in from an email perspective, both back to my equipment facility to tell them there's a new quote that's been confirmed, and also to me to say that I've definitely made that submission so that I can see all of those things happening in my email. So we're tracking all of the different stages of the process, and again, from a business perspective, I've now gone through and actually logged into that Supplier Connect, updated my prices and my dates, put in those additional charge items, and now I've got my results. So I've got my submitted request for a quote as far as the equipment facility is concerned. So the next, sorry, apparently I can't actually use a mouse today, so we won't worry too much about that. There we go. The equipment facility side of things obviously then comes into the equation. So what I will say is, as far as the first iteration of this development is concerned, we've left the selection of the correct quotation, so the one that you actually want to move forward with, as a manual process. Ultimately, in our next iteration, we want to automate this, and part of the conversation that we need to have at the end of this session is what kinds of things might you want to help drive that automation process. So we obviously have things like when can they deliver in terms of the promised date and time, and we have the price that they might offer you, but are there other differentiators, other values that might be relevant to help you automate a process entirely, or at least, let's say, 80–90% of the time, to actually select those purchase orders and purchase quotes and turn them into purchase orders without having to physically touch them. So I've got my notification. Sorry, I really can't use a mouse today. I've got my notification, and the next thing I need to think about is actually selecting that best quote. So I'm just going to drop into my core system. So I'm back in the normal system that you guys are used to seeing. And again, I'm just going to refresh that screen. And as far as the system is concerned, I've got two new documents on the bottom of here. One of these, one at the very bottom line where it says 168, that's that second requisition that I put on for my 2-inch centrifugal pump. That was the one that only had one preferred vendor, so you can see on there that it's already gone straight to being a rental contract with a purchase order attached. The yellow background on my item code is basically telling me this thing is outstanding, so I'm waiting for the receipt to arrive. But as far as my 167 is concerned, the first requisition that I put on for the 4-inch diesel pump, that one is sitting there waiting for me to do something with it. So I'm just going to double click on this rental contract for a second. There are some of you who probably have not seen this particular variant of a rental contract before. So this is something we refer to as project-based equipment or project-based plant, depending again on which side of the Atlantic you're on. And as far as this process is concerned, we're basically combining the rental and the purchase order into one set of screens. So rather than going off and clicking on the back-to-back button and doing your additional back-to-back processing in a separate place, everything is in one place here. So if you haven't seen that, you will probably not have realised that there is actually a vendor tab in here now. So you've got a supplier or a vendor tab within your rental screens themselves. And you can see on here that I've got that new line requisition as my first activity on here. And I've also got a new little button in there that says quotes. And the point about that button is that I've got the ability to go and see in there how many outstanding purchase requisition quotes I got, and I can see who's actually responded to those. So my second one from MGF Trench, they haven't bothered to respond to me, and at the moment I'm in a hurry, so I don't really want to wait for them. This is the one, which is the one that we amended through the Supplier Connect portal, and Dave has just been pretending to be carrier and has gone and updated the other one at the same time. So you can see on there I've got a really clear picture of the amounts of money each of those suppliers are proposing to charge me for exactly the same thing, and clearly I'm going to go with my pump rental specialist because they're a much better deal than anybody else. If I wanted to, I can drill into all the detail behind those, so I can go into the quotes on each of those and look at the real detail behind it, but for now I'm just going to hit my convert quote button. A purchase quote into a purchase order for me, and the other vendors, the other suppliers, are going to be notified that they have not been successful. Okay, and again we can talk about where that might take us in the future in terms of potential other ways of thinking about how this might work. So when I hit that button, it's going to update this screen. This little bit at the bottom, again, if you're not familiar with this, is just keeping a track of all of the amendments to the purchase order that's linked to my rental contract. So you can see the other little bit that's gone in there is it says new line from requisition, and it's also put this Dello one, which is my delivery charge, in there. If I look at the rental contract lines, I started off with just the 4-inch diesel pump, and because I've now accepted that purchase order quotation that had an additional line for delivery charges added onto it, that line has also been added onto this rental contract. So there is no possibility of any confusion between AP, rental, job site, and any of the other pieces in this. We've got a train or a connection of data across all of those pieces. So if I hit the save button on there, I'm going to save my contract, and obviously I have just amended it, so I need to pop in a little reason for that. And given this is a demo, we won't do it properly, but there we go. So we've got my print, fax, email options, and I can go off and start playing with this in whatever way I want. So if I just refresh that screen, same thing that you would expect to happen at all times, I'm going to get that updated contract line in here. So I've now got my additional line popping in, and I can see that I've got an outstanding receipt expected on that purchase order. Okay. And again, for those of you who are already using Green or Emerald, you'll be aware that you've got a right-click option on here nowadays to allow you to confirm the vendor receipt directly from the core system. So you can do that from the control center. However, as the final stage of our workflow, what we've actually done is say that actually that role in reality happens out at the job site. The delivery doesn't take place in the equipment facility. The delivery takes place at the project, at the job site, out in the field, and therefore it makes sense to move that process out into the field as well. So the final part of this is fundamentally, if I go back to pretending that I'm Craig for a moment and just look at the top of this screen, as well as Craig's normal options, he's also got the option now to be able to receive a re-rent from the job site portal itself. So these are the various bits and pieces that we've just put on orders for. So I've got my 2-inch centrifugal pump, the diesel pump, and the delivery charge. And as far as Craig is concerned, when the delivery arrives at the job site, he can either come in here and do a receipt, or we've done a matching mobile app, so you can actually receive on an iOS or an Android device if you wanted to. But for the purposes of just this quick exercise, I'm going to confirm the details of my 2-inch centrifugal pump. So you can see on there that I've got a field that says item reference. So again, from a terminology point of view, serial number, reference number, item reference, whatever any of you have your system set to, I can confirm that details. That's effectively whatever the supplier's unit number or asset number or fleet number might be that's painted on the side of the machine. I can confirm that detail. You can, if you want to, suggest to your guys out in the field that they update all of the other bits and pieces that you might want to include. But what we've done is relax the rules around those things when it comes to receiving a re-rent. So if you don't actually need to have things like your terminology or your holding text fields filled in, you can avoid it at this point in time. And all I have to do is confirm that. So you can see I've now confirmed that receipt, so that's done. And I've still got those other two pieces outstanding. And we'll just finish off just by confirming that receipt in full. That's going to obviously update my equipment facility, and from an equipment list perspective, coming back to that normal view that you look at the job site all the time, and if I just refresh my screen here again, I've no longer got my 2-inch pump waiting to be delivered. It's now been received out of the job site, so I've got all the detail that I need in on there, so I can see the completion of the process from a business perspective. There is one other thing that the vendor can do, and that is they can go in at any point and update that serial number that we just put in there, the item reference field. So that means if the job site does make a mistake and your invoices come in and they've got the wrong serial number on them, or if there is an exchange or a swap out that happens, the vendor can go in and update that information to make sure that your systems are correct. So they can't change the product code, but they can go in and say, actually, it's not serial number 12345, it's actually 99999, so that you can keep those records up to date from all perspectives. Okay, hopefully that has made sense to everybody as a process, and what I'm going to do now is just talk a little bit about the version side of things, and then we can go into questions. So what we've done as part of this functionality is extend some of the new features that came into green and just build on top of those from an Emerald perspective. So in the green version of the system, you were able to put preferred vendors in at the item group code level, and you can still do that. But what we've done is extended it in Emerald to allow you to do that at the item code level and have variation at the branch or depot or equipment facility level. And again, apologies, I'm trying to talk in multiple languages simultaneously. And we've also extended the use of things like the operator maintenance and the job site portal user to actually say that you can have an external user who is purely a supplier and not an external user who is related to a customer or a project. So you've now extended that functionality as well. So if you're in a version of green, you've got some of these elements. If you're in Emerald or moving to Emerald at the moment, this is now available to you within the Emerald system. Okay? And as part of that, we've obviously got the two new applications which are brand new to everything. The first is the Supplier Connect portal, and the second is that re-rent receipt option, which is available either within the job site portal itself or as a standalone mobile app running on either Android or iOS. So you've got those two elements as part of the piece as well. Okay, so I'm going to open it up to questions and hand it back to Jill to moderate in terms of handling questions.
Okay, everyone, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute your phones and jump in at any time. We do have some questions that were submitted, so quick question for Helen and Dave. When is Supplier Connect going to be available?
So Supplier Connect is going to be available from the July release of Emerald. So anybody who's already got Emerald will have that availability from that point onwards. If you're moving up to Emerald at this point in time, it will be in your release as you move forward on your release program.
Okay, thank you. I have another question here is, will it work for non-re-rental purchasing?
Okay, so that's a very interesting question, and one of the reasons we wanted to have this webinar was really to open up the potential of where we could take this. So I was having a chat to a few people who were on this phone in separate sessions, and one of the first things that came up was, can we use this for normal purchasing? So I think there's a question to everybody on the call. Would this be something that you'd be interested to use for, let's say, parts ordering or bidding for transport orders or any of those kind of things that might extend it? And if we were doing that, would we want to actually bring it into the core system? So rather than just triggering it from a requisition, we could trigger it from being within a normal rental contract or a sales order or a work order or something like that. I think that's a question to everybody out there on the phones. Is that something that you would be interested in doing?
We'll give them some time to think about that and get back to us. We also have another question, though, while we wait. Our equipment yard has a percentage charge added to the vendor price that is then charged to the job site. Will Supplier Connect be able to support that?
Yes, the way that the project-based plant order or the project-based equipment order works, which is the sort of back end of this when it hits the equipment facility, that has the option in there for what we refer to as an uplift, and that applies a top number onto the vendor price. So if you're using that configuration, you've got the system set up that way, then your vendor rate will then have an uplift against it of 5%, 10%, whatever the number might be, to pass that out through to the end project or the end job site.
Thank you. And another question, will it work from the back-to-back button in the core Java screen?
Not at the moment, but that is something that we are very strongly suggesting that we're going to put into our roadmap, because we think it's as useful to come from there as it is from anywhere else.
One last thing I have here is, can it work on mobile devices and or smartphones?
Yes, the whole of the Supplier Connect side of things is obviously done in a browser, and that browser will work on any kind of device that has a browser capability. And for the same reason, the receiving of the equipment at the job site, because you've got that option to do it from the job site portal, means that you can also receive, even if you're on a Windows phone, which we don't normally apps.
Okay, Helen, or Dave, do you guys have anything else you wanted to add, or maybe open up the phone lines and get some requests or some maybe feature?
I think from our perspective, it's interesting to know what the floor thinks about the automation process of accepting the back-to-back re-rent order. You know, what would your process, you know, what would your thoughts be if we're talking about automation? What would be the elements that would trigger the acceptance, whether it's going to be price and promise date or anything else specifically that you might think of? We're very interested to know what your thoughts are on that. Make sure you're not on mute when you're talking, just in case. Done that before.
Gary and Tammy, I think you guys had some thoughts about things using this from a normal system perspective rather than just from requisitions. Is that something that you'd be interested in sort of talking about to the group?
Yeah, hi. It's been a good presentation. Something we'd certainly consider. I had a question in terms of if your equipment facility owns an equivalent item, could the system intelligently check to see if you have stock available before, and if you don't, then create the re-rent contract?
Yes, absolutely. What we need to know from you really is whether that is just around the equipment facility or whether it needs to look at proximity in terms of other locations. So is it just a hard and fast rule, if you haven't got any in this location, go for it? Or is it, if I haven't got any in this location and there's none available in any of my nearby locations, go for it?
So these are all possibilities. It's just determining the operational rules behind it.
Yeah, absolutely, and we're really just looking for a little bit of suggestions from people as to what might drive that. We've got our own ideas in terms of what we've talked about with individuals so far, but it will be very useful to know from a group perspective whether there are specific things that maybe we haven't thought of yet that will be relevant.
Another question I'd noted down was the transport planning facility within the system, and I believe that you obtained 3 quotations for a transport requirement. Is that something that could share the same technology?
Yes, it is. So that's effectively doing purchase requisitions in the background. So one of the conversations actually we were just having this morning was whether or not we could just use this as a bidding process for any kind of service. So got a transport requirement or I need somebody to label my location, any of those things potentially is just a service that needs to have bids against. So there's no reason at all why you couldn't use contract to handle any of those processes.
And my final question I had was really about the vendor price lists. So you can pre-populate the system with your agreement with your vendors. Does that include book and discounts for each item? And also, is there a facility to upload those prices?
Yes, so we've got that now available for both the supplier rates or the higher rates and also for the discounts. So all the uploads, the static interface that we have in our system, or also now have the ability to actually load up for suppliers. So again, we've got some documentation for that. Once you're ready for that, we can release that to you. And it's just a case of it's just exactly the same functionality as the current hire or the rental rate upload, but instead of using hire and sales or rental and sales, we're now using the supplier prefix.
Okay, thank you.
Going to jump in real quick here. We have another question. Have any groups doing the testing for this been successful in training your suppliers on using Supplier Connect?
I think that's a question that Keir will probably want to respond to, and I think that's something that I think we'll get into some real detail on that once we get into a go live phase. They're rolling it out slowly, and they've been doing pilot projects as they go. So I think supplier training on this is a big deal. I spent last weekend, the very conversations that was happening there was between construction companies and the various rental companies saying basically this is the direction that we're going in. We want to get to more digitalization. We want to get to less human communication and more system-driven communication so that we're only concentrating on exceptions. So I think it's where the market's coming from. We are expecting, and I think everybody will expect in this situation, to have a reasonable degree of pushback from the vendors and from the suppliers, because to them it's something that is a potentially a negative, a drive downwards on their rates. But it does seem to be where people want to direct things to, a quick trip, or whether it's quite a slow process to get there. I think it's the general gist of where you want to move to. So one of the things that's come up in the UK, there is a similar thing does happen in the US, but from a UK perspective, it's quite common to have these things we refer to in the UK as implants, which are people from rental business actually sit within the procurement department of the construction company and effectively process things back into the rental company's systems. So they sit there as part of your procurement team, though actually they're working for somebody else. And a lot of the construction companies we're talking to here have some issues around that, because A, you have somebody who doesn't actually work for you but sits within your business, and therefore there's always potential for information to stray in a direction that you don't want it to stray in, and always a question over whether you've really got the best price that you can get. And I know some of the US rental companies do a similar process, though I don't think the word implant is used in quite the same way. But that's something that, again, people are looking at as a potential thing to eradicate or remove by making it slightly more remote by using a portal that people can access from elsewhere.
Okay, Helen, Dave, I don't have any more submitted questions, so we'll just go ahead and leave it open for the floor for a couple, maybe 30 seconds, and if not, then we'll go ahead and start wrapping this up.
Matt, Brett, have you got anything from your perspective, looking at the world?
Helen, I don't at this time. We, of course, are looking to automate the integration with our contracted vendors. Mm-hmm. Given that the vast majority of our relationships are one-to-one, so I'll be interested in having more discussions with you around that.
Okay, so that second example requisition I did where it only had one preferred vendor, effectively that would be what you'd be talking about, because you've got a contracted relationship on that type of thing from that facility. So you could automate the entire thing. So the moment the person out in the field put the order on and said, I need X, that could go straight out to your outside vendor without any intermediary being required.
Correct. Yeah, and our contracted provider, of course, has a host system, and you know, I can imagine rather than sending them an email, they would want us to place the order directly in their system.
Yep, and obviously that email could be actually a stream of XML that moves out instead.
Yeah. Good demo. Thanks, Helen.
No problem.